I wanted to talk about this report that just came out from Grist, a partnership between Grist and the Texas Observer, because it hits on a lot of questions that we're going to start to have to deal with as one, we transition away from fossil fuels, but also try to reckon with the devastation that it's caused and the amount of people in this country who do work in that industry and are very much up for grabs because our opponents are going to try to be doing everything that they can to make the average kind of like fossil fuel worker think of themselves as more tied to the bosses than to the rest of us. And as the left, if we want to make this transition, not like if we want to make this transition just, we 100% need to be including these workers in our visions of the future. But also, if I'm just going to be completely honest, if we want to be successful, we're going to need to do this because we cannot deal with a backlash. And we actually have in this moment a very big opening, especially when it comes to oil in Texas and in New Mexico, because the price of oil has dropped so dramatically that a lot of people are recognizing that their jobs and their livelihood and their work is on the chopping block while the people at the top of their organizations are sitting pretty. Um, so this piece, I highly suggest people check it out. It's in Grist and Texas Observer. The title of it's called "Waves of Abandonment." It was written by Clayton Aldern, Christopher Collins, and Navina Sadasifiam. And it sort of goes through what's been happening in West Texas and New Mexico over the past year. As folks who, as folks probably are familiar with, there was a massive drop in the price of oil, which meant a lot of rigs and wells stopped being profitable. And 7,000 wells they are estimating went under over the past year. Grist and the Texas Observer estimate that they think an additional 13,000 will as well. So already double what we're dealing with here. And this creates a lot of problems, but let's just start with the most obvious environmental one. Well, if you create a structure that is designed to pump oil from below the ground to the surface, and then you stop pumping that oil, what do you do with that well? Well, you're supposed to plug it up. But these companies either aren't plugging them up or doing a really shoddy job of that. And it is polluting people's water, their land. And for folks who aren't from Texas or aren't familiar with this, there's another tension because we have a separation between land rights and mineral rights. And what that means is like you could have a ranch or a farm, and you own the land, but the what's underneath the land might be owned by a private oil company, which means they can come onto your property and drill for oil. And they're supposed to legally have, they have a responsibility to plug those up when they're not using them or, take care of it. But as you know, and I'm sure most people can
Super
imagine,
diligent about that.
they are not very diligent about that. But it's getting even worse when you're seeing this massive glut in the price of oil because a lot of those wells have had the ownership pass through like 4 or 5 different hands, and it's almost like what happened during the financial crisis, during the housing crisis, where like nobody knew who actually owned the buildings anymore. And that's also happening across the state of Texas, where you have so many different speculative like organizations that are supposedly running the well, and then it's hard to even figure out who owns it in the first place. Well, because of deregulation and obviously short-sightedness from the Texas GOP and anti-human organization, uh, a lot of these groups have not put in enough money to deal with the cleanup and the maintenance that is necessary to deal with what happens when you start shutting down these wells. The Texas Observer and Grist estimated, um, sorry, reported that people are saying that the cleanup cost of all of these abandoned wells might reach a level of $117 billion that would be the responsibility of the state of Texas, the people in the state, the taxpayers in the state to pay. Not the corporations or the oil companies who over the past 100 years have profited richly from destroying the land around this state. Not them, but the people, most of us whom did not receive nice paychecks from this kind of ravaging of the land and of our natural beauty, and also arable land and ranch land. And it's bad when you talk to ranchers, as this piece does, about what they're dealing with, because they have huge parts of their their land which they can't use. They're worried about contamination to their water, which is a huge problem, especially like water is already a problem in West Texas, as you can imagine, because it's hot as hell, it's arid. Imagine that compounded with the fact that now oil is probably leaking into your underground aquifers because some asshole finance company based in New York City just decided that they're just going to walk away from their investment. And the GOP in this state is not going to follow through and force those companies to pay what they should be paying.
Yeah, this reminds me of back when libertarians were more of a thing. You don't really see that so much, but uh, that phrase of people use who, when they're commonly, voicing corporate propaganda, is, why don't you go read Economics 100? And that's, I always said, because that was because they don't teach externalities until Economics 102.
That's pretty
Because libertarians, like that, it's such a very clear basic concept, but it's one that's just antithetical to capitalism. Just never deal with maintenance or externality at
yes.
all. It's always our problem.
And that's really the tension here. So it's like in Texas, this is quoting from the piece. In Texas, producers with 100 wells must post a bond of $250,000. That may sound like a large sum, but it works out to only around $3,968 per well for a producer with 63 inactive wells, which is the average number of inactive wells operated by almost 1,500 oil companies with the state's most idled wells. To put that into perspective, the average cost to plug a single orphaned well is $30,000. When wells are inactive for extended periods of time, the states may require companies to post additional bonds, but companies can get around that requirement by simply reporting them as producing a small amount of oil or gas. Without adequate inspection capacity, the states can't verify these claims. And this is why it's important. Like, this is a story that's important just like on a basic level of somebody who reads the news, like, oh, this is an outrage that they're doing this. This is why it's really important as we transition into whatever this next form of energy production is going to be, is that oil is not as profitable as it used to be. The Texas Observer and Grist believe and are estimating that the price of oil per barrel is going to drop below $50 a barrel and $49 a barrel in 2022, which is a strong indicator that a lot of these wells will go defunct, which means across the state and across New Mexico and other places that produce oil, these wells are just going to be sitting hazardous environmental catastrophes, just waiting to happen, not waiting to happen, continuously happening, essentially. This is why we need a Green New Deal, but we also have to tap into this reality that there's still money to be made in oil production. There's still money to be made in dirty fuel. But for the average worker, they can see that things are shifting. And if we do not, as the left, take advantage of this power that workers have to fight for a shift that is just and protects our environment, what will end up happening is an abandonment of these oil wells and a sitting environmental catastrophe that will be paid for by taxpayers and everyday working people in this country, instead of the folks who profited and made a shitload of money off of the ravaging of the land for 100 years. Do you understand the difference that I'm trying to make, the point that I'm trying to make here? It is clear that there is a shift, just like on an economic level, away from these fuels, right, and these sources of energy. But if we do not take advantage of the moment that we have right now and try to include oil workers into a shift to a green economy, what's going to happen is we're going to shift to the green economy, and then we're all going to have to pay for the oil companies' greed. We have to do something different. We have to stand up for the environment. We have to stand up for indigenous folks in these communities who are extremely disadvantaged, when it comes to dealing with the environmental crisis, and the cost of cleanup here. And we have to stand up for working people who should not have to foot the bill for an industry that has destroyed communities and destroyed the land.
You mentioned about what, 3,000, $3,500 per well,
Yeah,
which like for the at the height of like oil or like a reasonably high oil prices, that's like 20 to 30 barrels.
yeah,
Just put aside that for just the future mess that this is going to cause. I mean, that, yeah, that's the one thing that I think it's hard to wrap your mind about these bottom line decisions. This is just the cost of doing business, and baked into the cake that like, yeah, we're going to be able to escape some of these costs. And it's yeah, disgusting. And people should have, you should be able to talk to the average Texan or whoever, whatever part of the country that, I'm North Dakota, right? Like you have a sense of pride in your environment and the place you live. This shouldn't be nobody wants to be in the position to defend this. And yeah.
No, it's just like, one of the things that I always found, like, we talked on TMBS. We haven't had him on Left Reckoning yet, and I'm sure we will. I'd hope to in the future. But Ryan Pollock, who is a great union organizer here in Central Texas, who got the AFL-CIO to pass a Green New Deal resolution. And as I always say, that to get the AFL-CIO to do that in Texas means that you're working with people who work either directly or indirectly with fossil and dirty fuels, right? But they were able to do that because people in those industries understand that there is a shift that is happening and that these industries are not going to be as profitable as they've been throughout their lives. And they also understand that the people who are going to be able to walk away from this scot-free are the people who made millions, while the people who were the actual workers who are producing this stuff are going to be left out to dry. And we have to take advantage of the moment while we have it, because it's going to shift. We're seeing the shift already happening before our eyes.
I mean, I saw it happen with my younger brother. He finished with an engineering degree and had offers from oil companies in Houston, and chose to go to a manufacturing company instead because of how volatile oil was. And it wasn't because he was listening to his leftist brother like rail on about how evil oil is, right? It was because everyone knows, and those fucking oil companies have to do song and dance about how they're like greening up, right? Because that's a huge labor force issue for them.
They should read the Financial Times when they write about oil, right? Like they love these young new executives of oil companies who they understand climate change is real, blah blah, because the oil companies understand that they have to do, they can't do the denial anymore.